You've been growing in containers all summer long, and now what do you do with them as winter approaches? Well, with a GreenStalk vertical garden, you have a number of options. Join me today as I discuss the GreenStalk and winter. Hi, I'm Gardener Scott, and while I'm focusing on the GreenStalk today, these considerations are valid for all container gardening. If you're growing in big pots or 5-gallon buckets or grow bags, these are some things you should probably think about as you go into winter. First being, don't need to worry about them at all. I grew in this vertical garden last year and just left it in place all winter long. I get some pretty severe weather, and that's enough to kill the plants in a container. And I had prepared this bed for the winter by pulling all of the plants so it was cleaned up going into the winter. But then I just left it in place. And that's okay. That's definitely an option. And then in springtime, I added new soil to the container. I fluffed it up, I got nutrients back in it, and then this tower was all ready to go. But what if you're growing in those containers? You have plants in them as you're going into the winter, like this one. I planted some strawberries, and these strawberries are going to stay in place all winter long. I've tried growing strawberries in containers in the past, and I've had some mixed results because if we have a really harsh winter, sometimes it's enough to kill the strawberry plants and they don't come back. I don't want that to happen with the strawberries in this GreenStalk this year. I have a few options. One being to move this into a nice protected area. And that's what I normally suggest if you're growing in a bucket or a pot or a grow bag. Just go ahead and take that from your garden setting and put it into a shed or a garage, an area that's more protected. And normally that's what I would do with this GreenStalk, is just roll it into a protected area. But this year I'm doing it a little bit differently. I'm going to leave this in place, but I'm going to tend to it, give it more care to try to make sure that these strawberries survive. One of the things I'm doing is to actually cover these plants. And so I've had temperatures dropping below freezing for many weeks now. At night, I put this frost cover over the GreenStalk vertical garden. And this is one of the new products that they began offering this year, and I love it. This gives about 8 degrees of protection overnight. And so when the temperature is just dropping to freezing or slightly below freezing, I get an extra 8 degrees of protection with this. And through most of the winter, I think that's going to be enough for these strawberries. I'm in zone 5B. That extra 8 degrees of protection basically moves my zone into 6A. And if I've got a nice mild winter, then these strawberries that can handle my zone 5 garden are actually going to be protected at the equivalent of a 6B. That temperature difference really should make a difference with these plants, and they should just coast through winter. But one of the problems that a lot of gardeners make with container growing is that they'll walk away from the plants in the winter, forgetting that they're still alive. They might be dormant, but you still need to care for them. During the autumn months, I'm concerned about too much heat with this system. So on really hot days, I can leave it in place and just open it up for some airflow to help cool it off. And then at night, zip it back up again to help hold all that heat in. Or I can just remove it if we have unseasonably hot days. That's part of it. The other issue is that it's really easy for the plants to dry out, for those roots to desiccate if you don't water them periodically through the winter. And so on warm days in particular that rise above 40 degrees Fahrenheit, you should think about watering the plants. You can't just walk away and leave them all winter, especially with something like strawberries. So at that point, I'll go ahead and remove the cover to water the plants. And so on warm days like today, I'll just go ahead, remove this frost cover, set it off to the side, and then water these plants. But in winter, the hose isn't hooked up, at least not in my area. I've already drained it and put it away. So it's time to do a little hand watering. So I like to water the individual cells because they tend to dry out first. And then because the GreenStalk allows the central watering from the top reservoir, I'll go ahead and fill the reservoir after that initial light topical watering around the outside. And by doing that over the course of the winter, I fully expect these strawberries, or any plants that I was growing in them that can handle the cold temperatures, to survive and pop right back in spring. Another option is to remove all of the soil, clean the pieces, and then stack them and store them away for the winter. This might be a good option if you think that your soil is old and you're going to start fresh in the spring. And if you don't want this exposed to the elements, but you don't have a lot of storage space, you can just go ahead and take it apart and then store all the individual tiers. Now, I suggest you do this after they're dry. If you do it when it's wet, it weighs quite a bit. But this soil has had some time to dry out. It's not completely dry, but it's not as heavy as it would be during the growing season when all this potting soil would be saturated with water. Another reason you might want to do this is because you want to reuse this soil someplace else. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to move all of this to my new greenhouse as I get that set up over the winter. It's just a simple matter of dumping out all this soil. Now, I like to use a plastic bag because it fits pretty nicely around the whole thing, and I can just dump all the soil out without making too big a mess. You could easily just pour it into any kind of container and accomplish the same thing. And now, as I do this with each of the levels, I'll get to the next phase, which is cleaning it up and then storing it. And so to clean these, I went ahead and hooked the hose up again, filled a bucket with some soapy water, and then just a light scrubbing is all that's needed to remove any of the soil residue and clean this up pretty well. The soil's been in here a couple years, but it's cleaning up very nicely, not having any issue at all. And in just a few minutes, this will be clean, ready to sit in the sun to dry, and then ready for storing. With the pieces dry, now it's time to just stack them, just like they were in the box when you got it brand new. Now, if you don't have one yet, or you want another one like most of us do, I'll put a link below, and if you use the Gardner Scott code at checkout, you get $10 off. That's really hard to beat. So just stick everything back together. And this is all ready to go into storage. Now, if you had any issues with disease during the growing season, I suggest you actually do the washing in a 10% bleach solution. That's a good way to try to sterilize the material. And yet another reason why you might want to clean and store before starting all over again next spring. While you could clean your GreenStalk every single year and start with fresh soil every spring, it really isn't necessary. In fact, I suggest you check out this video on how to rejuvenate your soil. I'm Gardner Scott. Enjoy gardening.